Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Thank you so much for joining the House of Shiloh Ministry on Yahuwah, beautiful, most holy day, the day of the week, the seventh day of the week is Shabbat. We love everyone that's joined us here. We appreciate everyone for joining us here, and we hope that you enjoy what we have today as we continue on our journey of out with the old, in with the new. And this is sponsored again by the House of Shiloh Ministries and presented by yours truly, Brother Andrew Bradley. We've been talking about the previous 5 parts, the history of the New and Old Testament, how the canon was put together, who was responsible for the canon, so we can understand when the date of the books and the letters were actually written. So that's important because it helps us understand what was taught from during the life of our Messiah and his followers and the authors of the letters and books. Once we did that and we understood what the old, when the old was written and what was removed out of the old and who gave themselves the authority to do it, it builds a picture to understand that the original authors had no say in the formation of what we consider the Bible or what was removed, added, and so on. So now we're at the point where I want to demonstrate to all of you all that the New Testament, the people that lived during the New Testament, the authors of the New Testament, really lived by the Old because the New Testament did not exist. And those people can understand that. They just don't believe in that. So what we're doing here in part 6, we're going to continue our demonstration in how the New Testament is directly from the Old. So it's really not out with the old and with the new. It's really back with the old, with the new. So we're going to go ahead and move to the next slide. I'll start our reading off first for today. And again, what we're working on here is demonstrating the New Testament scriptures and how they quote the Old. So you'll see the New Testament verse or verses and the Old Testament verse at the bottom that it comes from. All right? And we're going to go to Romans, the 11th chapter, 7 and 8 verses. And this is Paul writing. What then? Israel hath not obtained that which he seeketh for, but the election hath obtained it. And the rest were blinded, according as it is written. Elohim has given them the spirit of slumber, eyes that they should not see, and ears that they should not hear unto this day. So Paul is speaking of the remnant of Israel according to the election of grace. Okay? How grace has come to those who believe in the Messiah and their obedience to Yah's most holy law, his Torah. Where was Paul getting this from? Because whenever you see according as it is written or as it is written, they're quoting something, right? They're quoting something. And he's quoting Torah, Deuteronomy 29, 3, verse 4. The great temptations which thine eyes have seen, the signs and those great miracles. Yet Yahuwah has not given you a heart to perceive, and eyes to see, and ears to hear unto this day. Paul is quoting Torah. All right? And isn't it strange that someone like Paul, a man who supposedly speaks against Torah, is quoting it? I find that very strange. And I just want people to understand that that's not the only time you'll see that in this lesson. Paul, we got to understand Paul's history, right? Paul was a Pharisee of Pharisees. He tells you that. So he was a man of the Torah, taught at the feet of great Torah teachers. He was raised in Torah and emphatically defended the old ways of obeying it. And I call the old ways because he wasn't doing it right. That was the reason why the Messiah came in the very first place. So he never let it go. We could demonstrate that all day if we really wish. But as we talk through the New Testament verses as we go forward, I think this will be pretty clear. Anybody wants to add to this?
Nothing so far.
All right. Let's move to the next one. We're gonna start with Sister Lily to read the 14th scripture for us. On the next slide, please.
Okay, Matthew 22:31-32. But as touching the resurrection of the dead, have ye not read that which was spoken unto you by Elohim, saying, I am the Elohim of Abraham, and the Elohim of Isaac, and the Elohim of Jacob? Elohim is not the Elohim of the dead, but of the living.
Go ahead, continue. I'm sorry.
Exodus 3:6. Moreover, he said, I am the Elohim of thy father, the Elohim of Abraham, and Elohim of Isaac, and the Elohim of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look upon Elohim.
Thank you. Thank you. So here's our Messiah, the Word made flesh, the very Word of the Most High made to his Son. And he's sitting here quoting the very Torah that references him in the first place and his Father. So, again, why would our Messiah destroy something that he quotes from? It doesn't make sense. We can also speak to this in a little bit more. So I try not to add too much because we can go on some tangents, but I can't help it sometimes. For example, if someone says the Messiah came to fulfill, which meant fulfill everything in the law, thus we don't live under it anymore, then you'll have to ask questions like, well, where do you find the will of the Most High? The Bible tells you what the will of the Most High is in his law. So you're telling me that the will of our Father is no longer relevant? Or doesn't the scripture say if you pray according to his will? Now, if the will is gone because the law is gone, then you're praying for no reason. Because there's no will to align your prayers up with. So there's some contradictions the church has to explain. And they get pretty creative with it as well. But they do need to explain that. Anybody wants to add to this one?
Nothing so far.
All right. Let's move to verse 15. And we'll have Sister Billy, please read.
Okay. Romans 12:19. Dearly beloved, avenge not yourselves, but rather give place unto wrath, for it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith Yahweh. Deuteronomy 3:32-35. To me belongeth vengeance and recompense. Their foot shall slide in due time, for the day of their calamity is at hand, and the things that shall come upon them make haste.
Thank you. This is another example of Paul quoting Torah. Another example. Again, whenever you see it is written, or as it is written, you need to understand where it comes from. Why would the author say that? You think it's you just saying it for no reason? Doesn't this tell you that this is showing you where they learned this very statement from? Paul didn't create this statement. He's telling you where he learned it from. So now he's teaching his audience in Rome Torah by simply quoting Torah. And we consider Torah the first 5 books in our general understanding. But actually, it's much more than those 5 books. It's much more. Because most of the Old Testament contains not just the law, but the will and the teaching of Yah and the teaching of his prophets. So it's more than just the first 5. It's all of it. It's all of it. That's why the Messiah says, man lives by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of the Most High. That means Genesis to Malachi was included into that. You think, did he say, oh, but exclude Genesis through Deuteronomy? Exclude those. He didn't say that. He said every single word. All right. Anybody else want to add?
Just one small comment, and that is what you said is so true, because when the prophets spoke, they didn't speak on their own behalf, nor did they speak their own mind. They were the mouthpiece of the Most High, so they were speaking His words. So that's why their writings are important as well. That's why they're included. Instead of just the first 5 books, the writings and the prophets are included for that reason.
That's right. So whenever you think of Yah's law, you might as well think of the whole Old Testament. Think of the whole thing. Don't exclude Isaiah and Hosea and all the other great prophets, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and all that. No. You're absolutely right, man. Anybody else?
Nothing so far.
All right, let's move to verse 16. And Minister White, you can go ahead and read that one for me.
Okay, Matthew 22, 37 through 40. Yahusha said unto him, Thou shalt love Yahuwah thy Elohim with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy mind. This is the first and great commandment. And the second is like unto it. Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. On these 2 commandments hang all the Torah and the prophets.
All right, we'll elaborate on that a little bit more. But let's read the corresponding verses on the next slide, please. Continue, Minister.
Sorry. And thou shalt love Yahuwah thy Elohim with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy might. On Leviticus 19:18. Thou shalt not avenge, nor bear any grudge against the children of thy people, but thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. I am Yahuwah.
And see, here's our Messiah. The one that supposedly fulfilled all of it is quoting directly from it. And we have to understand that this creates contradictions. I want the audience to understand that. They need to see that they should start developing some questions in their mind. Why would someone who came, this is how the church teaches, why is someone who came to get rid of the law, saying we're no longer under it, speak of it and obey it as well? We could prove that he did it from his clothing to the holy days and the Sabbath. He did all of that. Why would he do that? And then when you speak on what he said in Matthew, the previous verses, where he said the law hangs on these 2. It didn't say by doing these you don't do nothing else. It didn't say that. It means that the law continues from these 2. It flows from these 2. Because if you love Yah with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, guess what you're going to try your best to do? You're going to try your best to prove your love and demonstrate your love. And according to John chapter 14, the only way you can do that is through obedience. That's it. You're going to obey him. And if you love your neighbor as yourself, and you're supposed to really love yourself, will you cheat yourself? Will you steal from yourself? Will you kill yourself? Most likely no. All these things, if you treat yourself this well, then, and you do the other ones this well, then the 10 Commandments are done. You've done the 10 Commandments. This is what he means when he says it hangs on these 2. It didn't mean that these 2 kicked them out the house and they're no longer needed. The rest of them are no longer needed. All right. Anyone wants to ask, elaborate, ask anything?
Yeah, I'd like to make a comment about the two commandments, loving Yah and then loving your neighbor. You can look at those as what's a good example? As a curtain rod. As a curtain rod, right? And then all of the other laws hang on that curtain rod. So all the other laws are the curtains. And then the two, love Yah and love your neighbor, right? That's the curtain rod. Because think about when you hang a curtain rod, usually, not all the time, but usually you have two pieces. And the two pieces fit into one. And then you hang the curtains on the curtain rod. So all the other laws hang, as Paul has said, hang on those two, which means they're really a unit. They're not independent. They are codependent, if you can put it like that. They're connected, right? They're interdependent on each other. And the last thing I'd like to comment on is this: when Christians say we're no longer under the law, I think somehow the clarification of that has gotten lost, and it has become
big time.
I think it's become more a cliche than anything else. But part of that statement can be true. And what I mean by that is this: when they say we're no longer under the law, there is one law that Christians are not under, and that is the law of sin and death. But even that is a conditional statement. It's not automatic. To say that Yahusha died and therefore we're no longer under the law, if it were applicable automatically, that would apply to the whole world. It's not automatic, which means you're no longer under the law when you are doing something to not be considered up under that law. So Yahushua has come and made it possible for us not to be under the law, but it's not automatic. Because if it were automatic, we could just continue in sin, right? And say we apply the blood, we apply the blood, we apply the blood. So to not be up under the law of sin and death requires you to not violate the law that brings the sin and death. And violating Torah is sin. Sin is transgression of the law. So I think there's an understanding that needs to come back into the church of what it means when the term is said, we are no longer under the law. Thank you, Brother Andrew.
Oh, I agree with you. I'll try to do another analogy for you.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever you are driving the speed limit, does the law give you a cookie and say thank you?
Only does it.
When I go a year without, I don't know what else could I didn't rob anybody or steal or cheat or anything that's considered federally or state or regionally illegal. Do they send me a coupon for a free meal at a restaurant? No. As you can tell, my happiness it's coming from my stomach at this moment. But no, they do not. So the only time law applies to you is when you disobey it.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't apply. We don't have any interaction with the law unless we fall under a requirement of the law. So that means when Paul says those who are under the law are under a curse, you better believe it. Because when you're under the law, it's because you have disobeyed the law. And Deuteronomy tells you what happens when you disobey. The curse is applied, or curse is, which will result in death. So we have to understand that when they talk of under the law, it means you are being placed under the law due to violating it. But if you don't violate the law does not impact you. You're not under it.
Mm-hmm.
You're not under it. So I try to use that example as well.
Mm-hmm. That's an excellent example, because that example shows you that there is a law that you don't want to be under, but it does not, how will I say, remove you from being responsible for adhering to the other laws.
Correct. And there's plenty of that. For example, I'm not under the law when I have to pay my taxes for my personal property.
Correct. Mm-hmm.
That's just something I have to obey, or pay the sticker for my vehicle. Now, I fall under the law if I do not do it, because now I am at penalty with the law if I'm caught, right?
Right.
So there are still things in the law that you have to obey, even though you don't fall under it. So you're right. You're absolutely right. Anybody else?
Nothing
All
else.
right. Let's move to verse 17 then. And I'm going to have Brother David read verse 17 when it shows up. I don't see it yet.
What? Oh.
There we go. All right. Brother David, go ahead and read the 2 verses only. Don't worry about the bullet points. I'll talk on those.
Okay. Verse 15 and 10. And again he said, rejoice, yet Gentiles with his people. Deuteronomy 32:43. Rejoice, all ye nations, with his people, for he will avenge the blood of his servants, and he will return vengeance to his adversaries, and will be merciful unto his land and unto his people.
Mm-hmm.
All right, thank you, brother. Now, I love this. This just proves the argument I've had with Paul all this time. Paul's not talking to some foreign person from another part of the world. He's not talking to a Roman. He's not talking to a Grecian by genealogy. Why? Because he's quoting Torah, and he's quoting a verse that's written directly to the 12 tribes. So when you see English translators twist this lie like they're doing in Romans 15 and 10, you can understand that Paul, and I could demonstrate it to you multiple times in the letters of Roman letters of Paul, multiple times, that he's not at all talking to foreigners, non-Hebrews, not a single jot.
Right.
All right. What's for that? So let's look at this verse. Why would he avenge for the Gentiles?
Wow. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
He's quoting Torah. So we know that's not the case. He literally quoted verbatim up to the point of with his people. And now you see the rest of the verse that it came from. So you know it can't be about nobody else. And by the way, just to point out, you see, it can't be Gentile used in this. See, this is another thing we have to understand. In the King James Version, Gentile would have been used here in Deuteronomy, or heathen, or nation. But because this is the Torah, and Deuteronomy is specifically to Israel, they couldn't use Gentile or heathen. But Paul, quoting this verse, could not be hidden by the translator. They just hope you never see this correlation.
Mm-hmm.
All right?
That is so true.
So now you see that not only is he quoting straight from Deuteronomy, that Gentiles could not work. It cannot be there. That is incorrect. And we also know the word Gentile really doesn't belong in the Bible anyway. So everybody understand that one? Not only do I like the fact that Paul's quoting Torah, again, this is the third one, but this demonstrates how the English church, the Roman Catholic Church, to be specific, has played around with his letters to misguide the populace, the world, with Paul's letters. All right. Anybody else want to add anything?
Nothing so far.
All right. Let's move to verse 18. All right. Minister Ronnie, I'm going to have you read if you're able, please. And I'll just have you read this one. I'll talk on it real quick, and then the next screen I'll have you read the corresponding verse.
Oh, did you say me? Okay.
Minister Ronnie.
Okay.
If she's able. If not, I can have brother read it.
Yeah, you might want to choose him for the moment.
Yeah. Hey, brother, go ahead and read this verse for me, please.
Yes, sir. 1 Corinthians 5:13. But them that are without Elohim judgeth. Therefore put away from among yourselves that wicked person.
All right. So I like to have us look up words sometimes so we can really understand what these mean. We never really look at this stuff. So what is a wicked person? And that in the Greek word, that is the poneros. And it's evil, wicked, bad, the evildoer spoken of. And who does Paul call wicked? All right? Who does he call wicked? Let's take a look at the next slide. All right. Paul calls wicked right here. But now I have written unto you not to keep company if any man that is called a brother be a fornicator or covetous, an idolater or a railer or a drunkard or an extortioner. With such and one know not to eat. Paul is calling sinners wicked and evil. And brother, go ahead and read Deuteronomy 17 so you can see another example of Paul quoting Torah.
Deuteronomy 17:7. The hand of the witnesses shall be first upon him to put him to death, and afterwards the hand of all the people. So thou shalt put the evil away from among you.
Mm-hmm.
So again, Paul is showing how thorough he understands the Old Testament scriptures, and he knows them by heart. This ain't a guy that's got a computer writing these letters. This gentleman knows his stuff, and he's calling those who are wicked sinners.
Mm-hmm.
All right? So when the word wicked is used, it's in reference to those who disobey Torah.
Mm-hmm.
Because fornicators, covetous, idolaters, those are violators of the Ten Commandments.
Correct.
All right? Again, a man that's been claimed to have eliminated Torah by saying that we're no longer under it, which is not true, demonstrates his knowledge of Torah by telling you, quoting, teaching from it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
All right? Mm-hmm. All right. So, anybody want to add to this?
No, we're good.
All right. Let's go to verse 19. All right. I think we're back at the very first reader, Sister Lily.
Okie dokes. 1 Corinthians 9:9-10. For it is written in the law of Moshe, Thou shalt not muzzle the mouth of an ox that treadeth out of the corn. Doeth Elohim take care for oxen? Or saith he it altogether for our sakes? For our sakes, no doubt. This is written, that he that ploweth should plow in hope, and that he that thresheth in hope shall be partaker of his hope. Deuteronomy 25:4. Thou shalt not muzzle the ox when he treadeth out of the corn.
Thank you, Sister Lily. And this is Boy, I tell you, Paul is deep.
Mm-hmm.
There's nobody else that will talk like this in the Bible. There's just nobody else that talks like this. He's talking about how you work, how the ox is worked to do the field work, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he's telling you it wasn't just written for that; it was written for our sake. But he's quoting Torah again. Again. I'm telling you, why do you think Paul was chosen out of all the people? One, his persecution of the early believers was done out of sincerity. He thought he was doing right. Two, if you know anything about Paul's history, for those who may not know, Paul was not born in the land of 12 tribes. I believe he was born in Egypt, raised in Greek colonies and Hellenistic colonies in the Hellenistic world as well. So he was a Roman and an Egyptian citizen. So he could speak multiple languages. But even though he was born outside of the footprint of the 12 tribes, he was raised at the foot of a scribe. Mm-hmm. So he was raised in Torah. He had the cultural understanding of the Hebrews, and he was accepted as a Hebrew because of that. So Paul was perfectly chosen for the ministry that he had coming because he already was familiar with the world where all the Hebrews were scattered in that region of the world. He knew the colonies of the Greeks and the cultures and their ways. He knew the Egyptian culture and the ways. He knew Rome and its ways. He was perfect for this ministry. So it wasn't that Paul was talking to foreigners. He was talking to people that were born in his circumstances as well, but they did not know Torah. They were born without it. They weren't raised in it like him. What Paul needed was the Messiah to justify him, to make him righteous. And he prepared himself once Yahushua showed himself on that road one day. He prepared himself for this ministry. It took years. And Minister White knows how long that took, I believe. How long did that take, Minister, before Paul started really traveling?
I'm not 100% sure. I think it is somewhere over 3 years, even more if I'm not mistaken, somewhere between 10 years, 3 to 10 years. But I'm not 100% sure.
Okay, and I was thinking around 7 myself.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we know it took him some time. He didn't just get the scales lifted off his eyes after 3 days, hit the road.
That's true. He had to undo or unlearn, or how can I say, he had to unlearn his understanding, his platonic, his surface level understanding of the scriptures, and take them to a new level. That requires time, unless the Most High is into downloading information, right? And I don't mean that he doesn't give us bits and pieces of information, but I'm speaking of a whole, complete biblical understanding. You don't find it downloaded that way. This is something that's learned over periods of time, years, as a matter of fact. And Paul was.
It does, and that's the approach he takes with us, right?
That's correct.
And whenever you, for the audience sake, whenever you find someone who you love their teaching and that they seem to have a relationship that's just wonderful, my question would be, how long have they served? And I tell you, boy, they'll probably say something, oh, I've been doing this for the past 15, 20 years. You're going to see that there's a lot of investment. Mm-hmm. And that's a requirement. And Yah don't break his own rules. He don't take a unique approach. He's not going to treat you like a computer and just stick it in your head. He doesn't want that.
Correct. Doesn't.
Nope. So anybody want to add anything else to this?
I just like to make a comment about the scripture that Paul is referring to when it talks about do not muzzle the ox when he treadeth out the corn in Deuteronomy 25:4. When that word corn actually usually is wheat. Usually it's when you bring the wheat to the threshing floor, right? And the wheat is separated from the chaff. And then if you want the ox to come through, the ox is going to come through and he's treading out this wheat or this corn. The reason they're not muzzling them is because the work that he's doing requires him to have fuel. He needs food to be able to do these things. So allow him to eat some of the corn or the wheat that he's treading. So don't muzzle him and say you don't want the animal to eat any of the produce that he's working with, right? So if you want to take this to another level, you can say the apostles are considered oxes too. Apostle Paul is considered an ox. And what field did he tread? He treaded the field of the minds of his people. And as he treaded among them, he made it clear that he had the right to partake of some of their substance because that's where he's treading. But he said he chose not to. But he says he's not muzzled from doing it. So there's another level of understanding for that. I just want to highlight that.
Oh, and thank you. I agree. Definitely agree. Because if you think about it, it does motivate the ox to continue forward by allowing him to eat.
Mm-hmm. So if you starve the ox, then he's not going to be able to tread. If you starve the apostle, then the work that they're doing for the Most High, they're going to have to go find another means to support themselves if they cannot partake of the field in which they're plowing in. So it's not right when you see people that are working in the field as an ox, right? And you say that they should not receive anything. They should not receive any, and they should not expect anything. They should do it for free. Even Yah doesn't expect that. The law of reciprocity is a foundational principle in the kingdom of the Most High. So it's not right for us to think that they should do this work and nothing should be given back into it. It's a give and take relationship. You give of what you have, and then the apostle gives of what he has. And actually, what the apostle is giving is far greater than any substance you're giving, because what he's giving you is teaching you of how to obtain eternal life, and what you're giving him is something that's perishable. You know, whether it's bread, food, even if it's money, even if you're tithing in money or an offering in money, that is perishable. But what he's giving is non-perishable. So it's still not even a fair exchange, but it is an exchange that is required by the Most High.
Yep, I agree. I mean, most people don't understand the investment it takes for someone to feed into them, to teach, to guide, to share what they understand and know. It's a lot of time invested in this. And if someone does this 24/7, how do they make a living for themselves when their lives is in total service? All right. Anybody else?
We're good so far.
Okay, let's go ahead and move to verse 20. And I think it's Sister Billy's turn to please read.
Okay. 1 Corinthians 10:7. Neither be ye idolaters, as were some of them, as it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink, and rose up to play. Exodus 32:6. And they rose up early on the morrow, and offered burnt offerings, and brought peace offerings. And the people sat down to eat and to drink, and rose up to play.
Yeah, I keep saying it. I'm gonna keep saying it over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many of Paul's letters make up the bulk of what we call the New Testament. I've spent a lot of time in Paul's writing just to show you where Paul gets his teachings from. And here's another example of quoting the Torah. I'm almost verbatim too.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I don't think anything needs to be said other than that.
Mm-hmm.
I hope people are understanding that you just don't realize that so much of what you read in this New Testament is indeed the Old. All right, anybody else?
We're good.
All right, let's go to 21, and Minister White, you can read that one, please.
Okay, 2 Corinthians 4:13. We having the same spirit of faith, according as it is written, I believed, and therefore have I spoken. We also believe, and therefore speak. Psalms 116, verse 10. I believed, therefore have I spoken. I was greatly afflicted.
Another Paul quote. This time he's quoting Psalms. So if a man is quoting the Old Testament this much, where is his inspiration coming from?
Mm-hmm.
Where is his knowledge and understanding coming from?
Mm-hmm.
Now, maybe somebody will argue and say, well, we didn't say you couldn't teach from it. That's some serious conjecture. That's some serious creative thinking there. You say it's done away with, but you'll teach from it still. One of the concerns I have with some of the people that do resist this thinking, this knowledge here, is that they use very creative ways to explain away this truth. But we've just been talking about Paul's writings, and I keep showing you how many times he references the Old Testament, the Torah. Pretty straightforward stuff. All right, anybody want to add to this one?
Let me touch on that statement you just made, where some people might say, I didn't say you couldn't teach from it. The whole purpose of teaching from any particular scripture is for correction, right? Edification. Isn't that what the scripture says? It's for our learning. So if he's teaching from the old scriptures, then he's actually expecting those who are receiving that teaching to live by it. So it wouldn't make any sense for them to say he can teach by it even though it's done away, because he's teaching you to live by it, to walk by it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he's not teaching for head knowledge, something that used to be that is no longer applicable. That's not his purpose. That's a waste of effort. He's teaching so that people can learn how to redirect their way. So those laws that he's reaching back to grab, even in the New Testament, are still applicable. That's why he's teaching. Thank you, brother.
That's right. Nope, I agree. 100%. All right, anybody else?
Oh, we're good.
All right, let's move to 22. And I believe it's Brother David's turn. There we go. All right, Brother David, if you can, please read the 22nd scriptures.
2 Corinthians 6:16, and what agreement had the temple of Elohim with idols? For yet are the temples of the living of Elohim, as the Elohim had said, I will dwell in them, and I will walk in them, and I will be their Elohim, and they shall be my people. Exodus 29:45. And I will dwell among the children of Israel, and I will be their Elohim. Lamentations, right? 26:12. Leviticus, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
26:12. And I will walk among you, and I will be your Elohim, and Yah shall be my people.
Mm-hmm.
All right, here's Paul doing 2 quotes of Torah. Now, that's what's important here, to teach you again, just to show you who Paul's audience is. Why is he quoting from Torah? Torah wasn't written to nobody else, by the way, and he's quoting it supposedly to Gentiles in Corinth. I heard a young man criticize a person who believes in Torah by saying, and he was telling that Paul was writing to people, the Hebrews in Corinthians, in the Corinthians letter. This guy said, this guy must be crazy. He's dumb. He's too ignorant to listen. He's writing to Corinthians. Of course he's not writing to Hebrews. The letters to the Corinthians. That's exactly what he said. I said, this poor guy just doesn't know what he's talking about. Because Paul will give you clues if you pay attention to who he's talking to. And this verse right here tells you. And what agreement has the temple of Elohim with idols? He's talking about the person. All right?
Correct.
For ye are the temple of the living Elohim. As Elohim has said, I will dwell in them and walk in them. And I will be their Elohim, and they shall be my people. That quote is not to any other nation but Israel. Why would Paul, now this is where you got to ask yourself this. Why would Paul take a verse that was quoted to Israel only, for Israel only, and repurpose it? He wasn't told to do that. In fact, he knows not to do that because the scriptures of old never said, I was a God to anyone else, as they like to say in the church. He always says, my people, particular people, my servant Jacob, my people Israel. He wasn't talking about anybody else. So this verse teaches you right here that the Corinthians he's talking to are the scattered of Israel. And this helps you that's why it's important to see when he's quoting something to try to figure out where it's at, because it gives you an idea of who his audience is. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
I think that's really important. But, as much as Paul quotes, we need to understand why he's quoting it. He won't repurpose a verse when the quote is from the Most High to a particular people. If it was meant for somebody else, the Most High would say so. You don't have the authority to repurpose the scriptures, even though the church believes they do. That's not the case. That's a lie. We know better than that. We know better than that. All right. Anybody want to add to this one?
I know we're good.
All right. I'm going to have brother read verse 23.
Galatians 3, verse 10. For as many as are of the works of Torah are under the curse, for it is written, cursed is every one that continueth not in all things which are written in the book of Torah to do them. Let me read the other verse too, bro.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. Deuteronomy 27:26. Cursed be he that confirmeth not all the words of this Torah to do them, and all the people shall say, Yamin.
All right. All right. Well, I appreciate that, brother. Now, there's no Paul doing it. Now, we might be on this one for a second. Galatians is a letter that, boy, the church loves to use because they fail to understand Paul's ministry fully. Paul did a lot of traveling, and he dealt with the Galatians more than once. This letter is only an incomplete conversation to what previous interaction he had with the Galatians. There were some things that were already understood between him and those believers. And what helps us understand that is by understanding Paul's other writings. Because if you do not understand his other writings and only take what you see in Galatians, it sounds like it's a complete contradiction. Because Galatians say the doers of the law, no man is justified, or doer of the works, the works of the law, by the works of the law and stuff like that. But we know Paul doesn't speak that way in Romans. He'll tell you now, only the doers of the law of Torah are justified in the sight of Elohim. Or in the sight of Yah. That's a big statement. So if that's the case, then he must mean something else. And we have to apply that type of thinking with his letters. You cannot say he meant this right here and ignore what he's already said. And if you want to go by the order of his letters, supposedly Rome in the Roman letter comes before the Galatians letter. So why not read and understand that first, right? Mm-hmm. But the church doesn't think this way. Well, and another problem we have is that the English has twisted his translations quite a bit, to the point just enough where it misguides the believers. Because the early church, Roman Catholic Church, did not want anything to do with the laws. They didn't want to do the law because it would require a huge change by the Roman Church. And that still goes for them to this day. There's no greater church organization more pagan than the Roman Catholic Church. None. Mm-hmm. It's full of syncretism. Full of it. Now,
I have a comment, brother.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead before I continue. Go ahead, bro.
It says the righteous shall live by faith, but they have no definition of faith, which the Catholic Church does not teach. But to comment on what you're saying, how they were twisted his writings. Look at the New King James Version compared to the Sefer Version. If you read Galatians 3 and 10, it says in the New King James Version, for as many as are of the works of the law. And you compare that to the Sefer text, for as many as are of the works of Torah. You see how the deception, how the translation deception is there. They took Torah out and put works of the law. Okay, so now if you don't understand his law, his word for law, which is Torah, that will mislead you. This is a misleading text. And then in the New King James Version, this is Galatians 3:10. I just wanted to comment to that. I was looking it up and looking at it and doing a comparative of both the writings. That's what a comment on that.
Oh, no, thank you, brother. To that point as well, it gets even more creative when you look at other translations. For example, if you look up Psalms 40 and 8 in King James, it says, I'm sorry if I'm jacking it up because I don't quote verbatim sometimes, but I delight to be in your will. Yes, your laws are in my heart, right? It says almost just like that. If you go to, I think the NIV or the ASV, one of those two, it will say, I delight to do thy will, and your laws are in my heart. So it separates will and law on purpose in the modern text. Mm-hmm. But we know the King James was directly translated from the Greek Septuagint, I believe. Don't quote me on that, but I know it's one of the early Greek translations, and that wasn't in there. It didn't separate. It isn't an and. It's a yes. Your law is in my heart. Those English translations do this to separate the law, Torah, from his will or from the modern necessity to obey it. Because if you're going to tell me that the law is done away with, you're telling me the will is done away with. But if you go to the NIV or the more modern English translation where it says and, you can't say that now. You can't say that. So, going back to Deuteronomy, where it says, cursed be he that confirm not all the words, right? Think of it this way. See what Paul is quoting. If Paul really meant that anyone who keeps Torah is under a curse because they could not do them all, then why would this be stated when the Torah was first delivered? Think about that. Because the Christian church will use this verse to say, see, you can't do all of it. Anybody that tries to do it all is a curse. Well, what is Paul quoting? He's quoting from the Torah when the Torah was first delivered. They were under this standard from the very beginning. From the very beginning. This is why it's important to understand Paul's reference. If he's going to say this, he's really telling you this is the standard that we are under. And you can't sit here and say, well, I'm righteous this way, but I'm wrong, but I do something wrong this way. And there's other people that, and other authors that quote very similar circumstances, like the one where if a man came in to the body, to the temple, and he had a nice ring and clothes on, and you treated him better than the poor, you're in sin. You can't come and do the Sabbath, but yet mistreat people. Because if you fail to do one and not keep it all, that's the point it's trying to make. You need to try to do all of this. And that's what Paul is saying here. And if that wasn't a requirement, why would it be said from the very beginning? Because if they go by what they're saying here, then shoot, it was no good from Deuteronomy 27. Should have never done it in the first place. There was no hope. Anybody want to add to this?
I'd like to touch on Galatians 3:10. This is where I think the way it's worded may also highlight some of the confusion, because it looks like it's saying that the works of Torah are under the curse, which is why you shouldn't do it. Right? But here's where the confusion is in Christianity. If the works of Torah are under the curse, then that means that the works that they do are also under a curse, because they will tell you that it is forbidden. Well, many Christians, maybe not all, will tell you that homosexuality is not acceptable. Right? That's a work. Operating contrary to homosexuality, being in a regular divine ordained relationship of man and woman, then they're operating under the law. If operating under the law, operating under Torah is a curse, then they're cursed by doing that. Another example is they know that it is not right to have premarital sex, right? So if they're restraining themselves, right, waiting for that day of legal consummation, then what they're doing is they're adhering to one of the laws of Yah, which means they're under a curse because they're under the works of Torah. If that statement were true, so that statement doesn't mean that the works of Torah are under the curse. There should have no other Elohim, right, before him. If they're not practicing multiple gods, if they're just worshiping one God, then they're observing the works of the law. That means that they're under a curse as well. Can't have it both ways. Is it making sense what I'm saying to you? That even they bring themselves under a curse by saying that.
That's
Mr. White, man. May I make a comment?
Yeah, go ahead, bro.
Sorry. Also, in caveat to what Mr. White was saying, for you to recognize a curse, you must know who his people are, because his people are the ones who follow Torah. So that's another misleading conception, that they know who Yah's people are. They truly don't. If they did, then they would know who was under the curse. Yeah, because the people that was under the curse were the ones who broke the covenant in the first place, dealing with Torah. So that it runs hand in hand. Mr. White is right. It makes sense. You can't have both. You can't have both. So I just want to say, yeah, you are correct. I believe you're correct, Mr. White.
Mm-hmm. And I agree with you, Darkus, Brother Darkus, and Minister White. And here's another ad. Here's another ad we can do. If Paul, this is Paul, right? We're talking about Paul's writing. If Paul says in one verse in Romans, the doers of the law are justified in the sight of the Most High. But then he says, the works of the law, no man is justified. Then you must say, either he's contradictive here, or there's a difference in the word doer and works, or deeds. Sometimes he'll use deeds as well. So what you need to understand is that works, the particular word works here, means something else, because you're absolutely right. If the works of the law are under the curse, that means anything you do in line with righteousness is under the curse. That means if I obey and serve only one Father, Creator, the Most High, well, that's a work. That's part of the law. So just like Minister White said, I'm under the curse. So this cannot mean just the things that make up the law. It means something else. And this is a conceptual understanding of living by the law that Paul is talking about here. And you can't get that understanding in Galatians alone. Okay, anybody else? All righty. Let's go ahead and end it here. We're going to end part 6 here with out with the old, in with the new. We got a little more to go through in this section. We thank you all for joining us. We appreciate everyone that has joined us today in joining part 6 in this lesson. Please join us in part 7 as we continue with out with the old, in with the new. Thank you.
Shabbat Shalom to everyone that's online with us. Thank you so much for joining us. Shabbat Shalom to those who are present, and Shabbat Shalom to those who will watch our video in the very near future. Shalom.